All right, welcome everyone. I am thrilled to have you all here. My name is Julia Leaf. I am the Executive Director of Cambridge Common Writers, which is a nonprofit organization made to support the alums of Leslie MFA's in Creative Writing program. And one of my favorite things that we do at CCW is to host virtual book launches for our alums and all of their incredible works, which all deserve to be celebrated. And I'm really excited about the alum that we are celebrating tonight. So, July Westhale is an award-winning poet and translator who graduated from Leslie's program in June 2013. Their poetry collections include Trailer Trash, Via Negativa, and their latest, Moon Moon, forthcoming from Pleiades Press on May 20th. Their work has been published in McSweeney's, Diagram, the National Poetry Review, Prairie Schooner, CALYX, Hayden's Ferry Review, and the Huffington Post, among others. July will be in conversation tonight with Michael Mercurio, a fellow poet and the former executive director of Cambridge Common Writers. Michael, who graduated from Leslie in January 2017, has been a long-standing advocate for the words of others, creating spaces for poets to read and talk about their works, such as through his popular virtual reading series, What the Universe Is. He's also run several workshops through the Pioneer Valley Writers Workshop, and the latest one, which still has some open spots, starts on April 26th and is called The Sonnet from Sydney to Seuss. So without further ado, I will hand things over to Michael.
Thank you, Julia. I'm so thrilled to be here tonight. It is a distinct and true honor for me to join July Westhale, who is a phenomenal poet, novelist, and translator, as they read from Moon Moon. If this is your first encounter with the brilliant and unconventional mind of July Westhale, please mark this evening as the moment when everything changed and you were able to understand new possibilities for being. If you already know July, you know that I'm not exaggerating at all. I've been fortunate enough to call them friend since 2018, and since we met, it's as though a new color has been added to the palette of my world. A few years back, I wrote a review of July's book, Via Negativa. I don't ordinarily quote myself, but this is a statement that I feel accurately depicts one of the things I adore about July's work. Westhale's poems afford the reader a vulnerability that never feels performative. This is not the deliberate opening of a single door to allow a glimpse of interiority, but rather Westhale actively working to document what their interior world is like so as to erase the distinction between that world and the reader's understanding. Tonight we get to step through that door together and embark on a remarkable journey that will take us to the moon's moon. There are a few key points to understand as we prepare for departure. First, a moon may or may not be the astronomically accurate term for a moon's moon. Second, this collection is a modern epic. It is written in three parts. In part the first, humans come to understand that we can no longer live on Earth. In the second part, they go to the moon, but discover that the moon is already full. And so, in the third part, they go to the moon's moon. With that in mind, I think it's time to turn things over to July and see where they take us.
Thank you so much, Michael. That's really hard to follow. Um, Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I had the great pleasure of getting to walk around AWP with Michael uh, and meet many, many of his poetry friends, and he is so generous and so beloved. And it's an honor to be here with him as the poetry mayor and also a wonderful poet himself. Um, Thank you so much, Julia, for organizing this and Cambridge Commons for having me. My face is spotlit. That's always unnerving. It's always wonderful to be in a Leslie space. It's also always unnerving to realize how long ago it was that you graduated from grad school. Um, and thank you everyone who is here on a Thursday night for poetry. I'm gonna read from some poems from each part. Um, some from part one, then Michael and I will talk, and then from parts 2 and 3, and then we'll talk again. And for those of you who are familiar with my work, you may know that I like to repeat things a lot, especially titles, and this collection is no exception. So in part one, the humans, which then become the heroes and maybe the gods, can no longer live on the earth, and they try to go to the moon. They try to go to the moon. The world as it is. There's snow on the ocean, which is meant to confuse us and does, though not because we are unprepared for it, but rather because the sight of it reminds us of the static-hearted parts of our bodies as we prostrate ourselves in years over yonder. Exploratory attempts to find warmth, not unlike a sure-footed expedition, in the disappearance of everything ripe, now covered with snow's annihilating speeches, in the blank stares of our children as they amputate themselves from the world, in the cloudscape of come forgotten to be enjoyed, on the snow of a down comforter at which we'd first begun, circle back to Exhibit A, in the cold expanse following the question, am I like winter to you? In the unspooling that happens when I play a memory over again for the too manyth time, in the television's convex and prudish eye, in the snowy sound of overuse, in the way empty feels like brain freeze, in the brilliant and nearly neon white of the sign which mourns vacancy, even if everyone around us says off-season, says they love the snow, the way it makes well-conquered land possible again. The world is Volta. One day, the rain picked up and left in a glowing and clear lack of acoustics. It really wasn't like anyone noticed, except a presence of absence. What once was boisterous and inconvenient shifted suddenly, stifling, reflective. A formula with X missing. Nothing to solve for. Public service announcement. People fell ill as they grew sick, as they fought death, as they battled bugs, as they zoomed to the finish line, as they stopped to smell gone roses, as they bit the dust, as they croaked their thanks, as they turned their hands into steeples of people, as they stared from windows, life-lining the words, I should have stared from more windows, as the air they made their own, as the air of their children, turned against them, as death stopped. Public service announcement. As they say, fear not, it is kind and gentle and good. This is not a test. Let it be said that the animals noticed first. Though they are not heroes, see above, nor demons, angels, gods, or oracles of the moon's moon. Equipped with mulings and lowings and etymology out of the register of the hero's hearing. There was no one but one another to point to yowl and scratch and stomp and whinny. Alt, to vowel and consonant and plosive. When the orders from on high came, the horses were awake in their human blankets, their portal eyes covered in foreshadow, the fabric of astronauts. The gods have defined it, but a bit was placed cold and silencing over the horses' truthful tongues. So it came to the cows, the most frequent victims of the hero's singing. One heifer struck a lantern with her foot. Chicago, she thought. Heroes are always blaming the cows. And when the fire vanquished the barn and the heroes left their animals but took their kin, it seemed clear. The gods have divined it. Now go. From the mouth of the gift horse. And this is all in brackets. So like, it looks like that on the page. I swear I was once a colt, eyes to the mirrored sky, fields of me with ropish legs, coming into the feed, the joyful feed, running like bulls at a festival. The only hands on my flank, tall grasses that played paramour, played lead, no weight on my back but the world, which bowed my body, both the arch of my spine and the curtain call. Then the call came, which I heard because I am God. The call and the trucks, the death masks so flies could not eat my eyes. My brother's gone, no chance to wave farewell, farewell, and I swear the sky heaved a pent-up sob. The rumble took me. I sweat and sweat in my clothes, which smelled of mustangs, other gifts. And when we at last chanced upon a new land, a man took my hood, and the poet opened my mouth and shot me gone. Here's a triptych for you. How it is said the world began. Big Bang. Dear children, I know it is difficult to believe in singularity in an age like ours, but consider for a moment that the world was a bright and barren space at one time. Yes, also a challenge to conceptualize. Please keep still, I am trying to tell a story. And an incident occurred that led to another and another and another over many billions of. Well, no, they don't know exactly the incident except that it was singular, and yes, it is because despite everything we know very little about the Earth's birth. Of course, I remember yours. You were early. It was Christmas. I'd just put dinner in the oven, and they said you were the most beautiful baby to ever ruin a honey-baked ham. But that isn't quite the same. No, really, it's all very complicated because it relies mostly on math and something called an echo, but not like that. Please keep your voice down. There are others trying to sleep. What was I saying? Yes, an echo. Thank you. An echo isn't like hearing your voice come back to you bigger and stranger, but more like tracing the expansion of the singular incident I told you about. No, I don't know exactly. No one does, but you have to have faith in scientists and astronomers and what? You're not wrong. Faith is typically a key ingredient in how it is said the world began, creationism. Once again, nothing. A pure dark, like black slicks before there was color or slickness. But there was, however, work ethic. Because first there was nothing. Before the nothing was a long line of ancestral nothings, nothing descending from seminal nothings like a void orchard. And then there was everything but something in there, something about light, and 7 days and Sunday and rest, which was nihility before it became an art, an act of closing these new luminaries called eyes to remember what nothing felt like. And I'm going to show how it is said the world began evolution. It looks like this. These are like on SATs, and I should know what they're called. But it's like blank is like blank is like blank is like blank. How it is said the world began, evolution. Maybe, I believe Robbie. Tree is to leaf, family is to blank. Blank is to species, tadpole is to frog. Fate is to scattering, sowing is to hubris. Faith is to heroes, faulty lifeboat is to blank. Beginning to end, end to beginning. And the last one I'll read for this section is, let us be done with this world. Let us be done with this world, cried the men, and take it upon ourselves to go to the moon, having cast aside this big blue chance. And up they went to the moon, but it was full, having short-circuited with unprecedented quickness. And so they went to the moon's moon, but they found it too brimming with creatures who refused to be vanquished, meaning the moons themselves.
Hi. Thank you, July, for that first set. And we're lucky enough that you are going to be reading even more poems after we have a little bit of conversation. I want to give everyone a chance to catch their breath because this is an incredible voyage that we're on together with these. I hesitate to even call them characters, these personages in your poems. This is such a vivid and slippery imagining. One of the things that really strikes me is just how slippery the identity of the speaker is, how mutable it feels, even in the midst of a single poem in this sequence at times. The whole I we thing was delightful for me because you're exploring a very large conceptual world or multiple worlds, and I think it's really amazing the way you capture these multiple perspectives. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you found your way to Moon Moon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. Again, really, really generous. Well, I wrote Moon Moon mostly in lockdown, and at the time was writing a lot of fiction, and I've spent the last 4 years really writing fiction screenplays. So it's changed my poetry quite a lot.
Mm,
And the the concept of Moon Moon came, I think, from this place of one, like monomania is always, I think, sort of your duty as a poet, but something I'm always working over like a worry stone,
mm.
really concerned with these unanswerable questions. But I think it became very amplified during lockdown. I was living in a friend's basement, and it was like the only thing that you could reckon with was yourself. And I was living in Oakland, and uh, there was a moment of orange skies and protests, and I feel like Moon Moon is actually even more timely now than it was in 2020, which is wild. But the playing with the speaker and the playing with breath, which happens throughout the collection, was also a way of acknowledging mine and our own complicity as like humans. So not only there are not only shifts and shapes between we and I, but there's also humans who are heroes, who are gods, animals who are gods. Then, there are oracles and there are auguries, and all of these are interchangeable because that's what it is when you create a world with hierarchy.
Yeah, yeah, and this world, these sort of Matryoshka doll worlds of the moon's moon. Oh, we're letting a cat in. This is what's happening right now.
Yeah.
We knew it would happen at a
Yeah.
potentially inconvenient moment, um, but these sort of Russian nesting doll worlds of the Earth, the moon, and the moon's moon are, inherently hierarchical. You can't have a moon's moon if you don't have a moon, and you can't be a moon if you don't have a planet. So it makes sense to me that there's an exploration of hierarchy here. And what I love is that there are surprising things in this exploration of hierarchy. I think when you scroll back and read through the comments later, you'll see that a number of us were really, really taken with the cow who kicks over the lantern and thinks of Chicago, which, is sort of an inversion of what one might think in this carnivorous culture of ours of the hierarchy of person and cow. So I think you do that very smartly, and I love the possibilities that it opens up.
Thank you. Although I can't claim that that was a smart move. It was just a really bad joke about that song about the Great Chicago Fire.
Look, bad jokes can be smart moves. I think so anyway. I'm saying it's a, Morgan just threw in the comments, heroes are always blaming the cows. Yeah, and I'm not going to argue with that. But I love how much that roots this very sort of speculative fiction type poem in a very real sense of history. Like there is a connection there to an actual historical event as we are moving in the poem off the planet, which we have not yet done. And I hope never to do. It seems a little risky for me. Um, but yeah, so I was lucky enough to read an earlier version of Moon Moon during lockdown. This is one of the great things about being friends with a poet, which I highly recommend becoming friends with a poet like July if you haven't already. You get to actually see the work progress. And so I remember, when you were first exploring the moon and the moon's moon, and this work does feel more timely now. It has evolved over the past 5 years in a way that I think brings a lot of your great insight into the human psyche to the forefront here. And I just want to say I love this. I got an advanced reader copy. I still pre-ordered the book. I highly recommend that all of you do that. There's a link in the chat if you need that. But before we hear you read more, I want to point out one of my other absolute favorite things about this book, which is the amount of sonic play that you get up to. It just makes it such a compelling and readable and fun and engaging book to read. I mean, even just little things like, the Earth's birth and the way you layer those that sonic playfulness with the sly humor that you lace throughout. This is such a compelling and enjoyable collection. And really, I'm just so excited to hear more from it.
Thank you so much. It felt like we have reference for the earth. We have reference, unfortunately, for sort of the earth and how it might be unlivable. We have some understanding of the moon. We have no understanding of the moon's moon, or if that's really a thing. So it can kind of be like I've been making this joke that it's like the like bargain basement Ramada of space. And because as much as I like to think that this is sort of a departure from writing about class and writing about California, it's really not. There's a sort of Donner Party element to this. There's actually even a poem in here that is that was inspired by some of the logs that members of the Donner Party wrote as they were on their journey. And those of the Californians in the room, there are a few, will know exactly what I'm talking about. So in having something fantastical, it feels important to ground yourself in what it is that is known. And the same feels true of repetition, because what I like to do with repetition is I like to obliterate, but you have to create a baseline first in order to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
also have to obliterate responsibly.
Ideally, one obliterates responsibly, but it makes me think of the oblique strategies card. Repetition is a form of change, which is one of my favorites. And reading through this as things are repeated, my understanding of them does change, and the ability to obliterate them is never it's never taken lightly in this book. And I think, frankly, I think that's a Californian sensibility, sort of hanging off on the far edge of the continent from where most people think of as the origination point. Which, as I sit here in Massachusetts, perhaps that's chauvinistic of me, but, it's the way our history in this country is taught. And seeing the parallel between the inhabitants of the moon, who have sort of created a gated community for themselves that prevents other people from settling there when they need a new place to live, really does strike me as a commentary on class and the particularly Californian way that that is expressed. And having just wandered around LA with you for a bit, and seeing how that city in particular is arranged, stratified. It really does, it brings a lot more to my understanding of Moon Moon, and Moon Moon, likewise brings a lot more to my understanding of class and power and dynamics in California. So yeah, definitely another one of your California books. Maybe we can call it a California trilogy at some point, market it that way for a grand reissue in a couple of years.
I'll let Black Lawrence know.
Yeah. I mean, I'll write a letter of support if you need me to.
Thank you so much.
Of course. So, do you want to read a few more poems before we chat again? Um, I know you had asked me to read a moon poem of my own. I'm I'm hesitant to do that in the middle of your poems. So maybe we'll do that after you read.
How about this?
Mm,
I'll read the things I have to read, and then I will talk a little bit about why I wanted you to read a moon poem.
yeah, I'm
Okay.
I'm easy. You know that.
But I'm gonna write a note to myself because otherwise I will forget. It's like easy in, easy out.
Oh, I won't forget it because it's now pressure on me to perform, and so I will remind you so that you don't have to worry about it. But
Thank you so much.
I'm going to take away my spotlight and turn things back over to you for the reading.
Thank you so much, Michael. All right. Um, let's move on to part 2. Enter the oracles and the other others. At the entrance to the moon's moon, which was merely a half-day's journey from the moon proper, stood 2 oracles shifting towards an about-face in proximity to one another. Think of all the fantastical elements of space aesthetic. They had them. Think 2 Whitneys, Preacher's Wife and Israel. You want them to wear white? They do. And if you like your auguries technicolor, that can be arranged. What was inarguable was that they turned to the open-mouthed citizens of the ship's interior and muttered something that sounded like, "Enter." It was too dark, and then we were alone. It was terrible, right? Yes, it was. Enough to convince a body to transubstantiate or to become like terror itself, a terror loaf. No, it wasn't. That's not quite truth, nor approaching a gospel remotely adequate. Do I mean dread, also associated with weight, weighty, and terrible? In epics, in voltas, the world becomes, the underworld redeems. Heroes die or don't die, and not for being alone. That they strive for. Solitude, a mantle. Yes, it was lonesome. Is that better? Perhaps. Why didn't someone find me? Was there even something to look for? In which the heroes become the antagonists. The heroes, as predicted, began to think of themselves as gods. The heroes had no one to challenge them. The heroes set about turning the dry lunar landscape into topographical fantasy. They built raised beds without plans to bury. They built libraries without books to read. They built the brightest side of the moon's moon into a grand cathedral without divinities to worship. It was then that they began to worship themselves. It was then that the altars were erected and confessionals whose only allowable confession was disbelief in hero gods. The hero gods began to return to a state that was pre-creationism. The nothing spread between them like a darkening flood. Individualism was lost. Singularity was lost. It seemed to them that they had everything they ever needed, so they tried for fire. I'm going to read a poem called Capital City Number 2, but I'm not going to read Capital City Number 1. And the reason I'm going to read Capital City Number 2 is because Michael helped me workshop this poem. And for those of you who know and love Michael, you will recognize his very distinct voice in the last 2 lines. So this one's for you, Michael. Capital City Number 2. Remind me why we journeyed forward to begin with, O Homer, O Gilgamesh, O cosmonaut, O astronaut, O all for naught. And when we fumble, the dust holds our struggle just, or maybe unlike sand on earth, where water makes clear we weren't there. But no tides scour the empty seas, pawking. Instead, our raw souls canter along, impressions left, narrative of a place more place than place itself. Raw, but here. How unfashioned, this moon. The day the rescue ship came from our old blue base, you were in the moon's ocean. Alone. Which is against everything Californian public education teaches. Do not swim alone. Do not turn your back. Did you even know there were oceans on the moon? There aren't. But there are great divots of space, of speculation. Maybe water was once here. Maybe it filled a hole. Because there are no fish, nor sand dollars, nor takeout bags, nor grasping fingers of kelp. There is no choice but to be alone. Alone as in the womb, alone as wombhood, which is to say, the very aloneness of alone. The sky and dust and great expanse of lack orbiting, lonely, alone, lonesome. Interrupted by an intercom, the foreign public school crackle of sound amplified. We have come for you. Help has landed. We will take you home. Part 3. Are there ghosts on the moon's moon? And if so, which side? And if so, what can we learn from the traceless prints their bodies made, the indelible mark they left in the lonely, lonely dark? As the scientists headed back to their ship, one cried, "Here!" At the brightest side of the moon's moon, where the settlement was said to have landed, were soft outlines in the dust, imprints of bodies in motion, moon angels facing one another. Genesis. It is simple, really. At the beginning of the world, there was one earth, and the earth expanded. It echoed from an unknown, gate-kept singularity. It was after nothing, but before the days of the week. The earth came from another species of earth, which begat many more versions of itself. The earth expanded so far it combusted, and the inhabitants who'd sought expansion in the first place said, "Too far, too late." The earth died 100,000 times. The earth was shorted, but the earth is the one thing that should never be shorted. Never shoot the moon on the earth. Never shoot the moon on the moon. On the moon's moon, one has a chance of shooting, but there is only oneself to shoot. Thank you. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about why I wanted to have Michael read a moon poem. This is the first reading of Moon Moon on what is like the Moon Moon tour. And I have become really obsessed with this idea of, I had this dream that my best friend and I started a postcard business where we printed out the shittiest, can I say that? Yes. Photos from our phones of the moon that people had sent us. You know, it's like, if your thumb is in it, even better. And that we like turn them into postcards that said like cool moon or good moon. And I have been really perseverating about this idea for about 2 years now, because I think there's something in it that is exactly like poetry. This earnestness of trying to capture something that you will never capture, but the capturing of it is so beautiful and so good, and still we try. And I am not saying that your poetry is like a shitty phone photo of the moon, but I want on this tour for folks that I am reading with to read poems of the moon, because everyone in this room probably has a poem about the moon, or where the moon makes an appearance. So please do me the honor of reading the first moon poem in the Moon Moon Tour.
It would be my pleasure to read this terrible photo of the moon that has somehow both my thumb and my tongue in it. I'm not really sure how I got that to happen. Um, and I'm going to read the poem, and then I'm going to happily explain how this poem got started. So, the moon's orbit is precise, enough to block out the sun's size without knowing it does so. So uncanny it seems deliberate, slipped into place, dust-faced stark mirror, slow repeater of sun. Is natural justice meted out with teeth, or scavenged from some body where it falls, simplifying in time? Rest always arrives and settles. Nodules of gypsum, desert roses, leave fine powder, flake under fingernails. A doubled desert rose sits on my desk, given after someone, no memory of who, visited Arizona or New Mexico, and plucked from landscape's open jaw dry ridges, cross-hatching like pencil sketches. The eye travels, the brain seeks patterns. Neither rests. I trace circuit after circuit as light changes the script. Thank you. So, a friend of mine who knows that I'm interested in, shall we say, UFOs, gave me this book that makes this alarming claim, I suppose alarming if true, claim that the moon is an artificial satellite placed into orbit around the Earth by extraterrestrials. And the reasoning behind this is that the moon is almost exactly the proper size to block out the sun during an eclipse. And I think we've all seen photos of eclipses, if not eclipses themselves. And so when I was reading this book, that just sort of stuck with me as the kind of thing that a poet like me might write a poem about. So,
I love this so much. Thank you.
yeah.
And I was your love of UFOs, shall we say UFOs, is news to me. I mean, I heard about it at AWP, and this is one of my favorite new facts about you.
Well, I'm glad, because it's one of those things that, as I was saying it, I was like, should I actually be saying this on a recorded thing that other people are seeing? But here we are. So yeah, ever since I was a kid, I've been fascinated by them. And we can have an extended conversation sometime about whether or not I believe in them or what I think they mean. But it's fascinating. People have experiences that they can't explain, and I think that also is a lot like you know poetry. Aren't we all having experiences that we're trying to explain that may or may not ever be understandable by someone else?
That's going to be the workshop that Michael and I teach together. It's going to be like how poetry is like shitty phone photos of the moon and UFOs.
Well, there are no good photos of UFOs that I've found, so it really does tie together very well.
Show
Yeah,
us a good photo of a UFO.
yeah. Um, Thank you, July, for giving me the chance to read that weird little poem, but also for giving me the chance to have that poem in conversation with Moon Moon. It is a very different poem tonally. One of the things that, as your collection moves through its paces, one of the things that I find really impressive is how the perspective changes to what I would call the heroic or epic mode. Not being a scholar, I'm just making that up, but it reads like, frankly, it reads like the Old Testament in a lot of places. Where if you're reading Genesis, there are all these places where, the what's attributed to God is stuff like, we should go down and mess them up, kind of stuff. And it's in this sort of abstract, almost passive way of doing things. And, you know, the heroes take on that sort of, it's almost as though they're stepping away from the responsibility of the actions that they are undertaking. And it becomes fascinating to watch the way this plays out and what happens to them as they're doing that.
Yeah, the first two sections are relatively long, and the third section is really short. And you're sort of left with an unclear understanding of what happens, and that's really intentional. And in the same way that I can't seem to move away from writing about California or class, I also my grandpa was a preacher, and liturgical texts and hymns were my first poetry, for which I'm actually, even though I'm not a religious person, I'm really grateful for that like formative kind of ballad form. And actually, one of my favorite pastors is here tonight, Hi Sue, Pastors and Poets, and just has an incredibly beautiful way of talking about liturgy. Um, but the really fun thing about writing fiction, especially poorly as a poet, is like when you go back to poetry, you're like, oh, I could just. There was a moment in Capital City #1 where I was like, oh, I haven't talked about anybody going to the underworld or like trying to rescue anyone. And so I just wrote a line that was like, let's just insert a scene where somebody goes to the underworld and rescues somebody that never needed rescuing. Okay, end scene. And you can just do things like that without having to be accountable to them. And it's part of the sort of fantastical world building that has
Yeah.
already happened, which was so fun. This was such a fun collection to write.
I mean, it is a fun collection to read, and you know, there is a very strong narrative to it, but it does feel like an epic. It feels like this was found on the moon's moon, baked into clay after being carved with a stick, you know, and then just left there for a million years until the first people who arrived on the moon's moon found it. And there is something so believable about it. Like, I got completely swept up in it. I was immersed in what was happening, and you know, this epic journey in a way where, like all good epics, there's so much truth in it, but there's no, like, you're not going to find fact in it. You know, I'm imagining Neil deGrasse Tyson getting really frustrated about this and shouting or tweeting something about how there's no moon's moon. What are you talking about? But, you know, that's not the point. The point is that this is revealing a deeper truth about our species and the way we move through our environment, and what this poet, and the Old Testament prophets were all poets. I'm just going to put that out there. You can call yourself a prophet, July. Um, this what this poet slash prophet is seeing, and you know, if you, we're getting biblical here, but if you read the book of Micah, you know, it's all social criticism written in poetry, and in a very real way, this is social criticism written in poetry. You know, this is not predicting the future. This is extrapolating based on your understanding of humanity, what's at stake here, what's at risk. And it is a very emotionally moving book.
Thank you. We're amongst friends here, so please, friends, if I start to call myself a poet, please cut me off. Or I mean a prophet. If I start to call myself a prophet, please cut me off.
I think you can call them a prophet. I'm just going to put that out there.
But I appreciate that, Michael. And I think one other thing I'll say is it was great. Via Negativa also was not terribly autobiographical in many ways, but this one certainly wasn't. Although I absolutely stole situations from the people that I love, as we all do. But when I was in college, I was trying to decide between two paths, and one was the path of a scientist, and one was the path of literature. And I have a kid's book called Occasionally Accurate Science, so I'm also always flirting with the idea of science as a story, in the same way that I'm flirting with the idea of the Bible as secular, as like a story.
Mm.
Because if you think about everything as a story, I mean, everything is a story, right?
And storytelling is one of our oldest and most potent technologies. It's the way we transmit information and the way we can convince each other of different viewpoints. And, you know, it's one of those technologies that's been around for God knows how long and hasn't really needed an upgrade in any meaningful sense. You know, you're not going to get the new I story or whatever. At least I don't think you are. Yeah. So, in terms of what you what you want folks to notice about this book, what are you hoping people are going to walk away with?
Honestly, my partner doesn't think I'm very funny. Um, and so if people are like, this is funny, it's very deeply satisfying to me because it means that I'm right. Um, but no, I think in all seriousness, that if you are a writer yourself and you're ever worried about rules or you're ever worried about fun, this was so much fun to write, and this came from a lot of failure in many directions. And I say failure very lovingly, in trying a few different genres that were not poetry and being a beginner, which I think everyone should do a lot. Um, so being kind of a failure and coming back to poetry and realizing that I was sort of broken free or liberated from this, a lot of constraints that were of my own making. So I guess that would be something I would want to impart to the writers amongst us,
Mm,
and to those who are maybe not writers but are readers, who are feeling some, like, because this is also an eco grief and a climate change narrative. It's all very speculative. There are lots of different versions of a story, and that is that is not one singular experience. That's not just terrifying. It's also um, experiential. It's also like, to imagine it is to take some kind of control over the narrative. And that
mhm.
would also be something I'd want to impart to people.
Yeah, the story is made in the telling of the story. And that is something that is really on display in Moon Moon because so many of the voices in Moon Moon are telling the story into being. And that's something that I think is incredibly beautiful. You know, there's this sort of chorus of voices, and they're not all right, and they're not all perfect, and they're not all anything other than human. You know, even when they consider themselves gods, they are still human. And there's something so essentially human and humane at the core of this book that really holds everything together in a beautiful way. And you are funny. I'm sorry. I believe your partner is here tonight. I don't want to cause any sort of issue, but this book is funny. There are moments where I laughed out loud. I mean, the cow. I am never going to not love that dumb joke that becomes this beautiful subversive image.
Thank you. And sorry, who I
Yeah,
think.
I'm sorry too.
um, do we want to see if
Sure.
folks have questions, or?
Yeah. I think we absolutely can do that. I'm going to invite folks who have questions to either unmute and pipe up and this family style here, or type them in the chat if you want to hear me read them in my dulcet tones, or use the hand raising feature and I'll call on you. I guess I'm in charge. And if you don't have questions immediately, or oh, Robbie Gamble, you've got your hand up. Thank you, because otherwise I would just come up with questions.
Shall I go? July, this is amazing. I'm so looking forward to getting my hands on this book. I guess, yeah, I remember first learning about moon as a concept. You wrote about it in your blog several years ago. I think it was early on in the lockdown. And I've thought about it a lot ever since. And to me, the thing that I find really interesting is just thinking about gravitational forces amongst these, different size things. And so I was really struck tonight, like hearing you talk about hierarchy and class and how that's sort of imbued through the book. And I just wondered if you could talk about those things as gravitational force and how they affect one another, because that was something that I was really intrigued by.
Hi, Robbie. It's so nice to see you. Thank you. This is a really great question. I think when we're talking about things that are sort of sociopolitical and they're kind of constructions, they are constructions of our own making. When we're talking about the thing that is the dominant thing, it is always posed, the thing that is not the dominant thing is always posed as almost a lack of, right? Like femininity as a lack of masculinity, or poverty as a lack of wealth. And the thing that is a bit democratic about Moon, like the idea of a moon's moon, is one, it may not exist. And it really is anything that orbits a moon or anything that orbits anything else. So it can absolutely be space trash. And I love trash. Trash is so democratic. And so there is a sort of, while I have sort of been thinking about the moon's moon as like a bargain basement ramada, and that does have class connotations to it, there's also something equalizing about, like, in catastrophe, where do we go? Like if we're all in crisis and there's no space, like where do we go? But in terms of that gravitational pull, the difference here is like one is constructed and one isn't. And one is just constructed really, really well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. No, thank you. That's wonderful.
So Susan asked, how did you know when writing this, when you were outside this world, when you'd written a poem outside of it that didn't fit? I love this question.
Me too. I will give you all my quick and dirty, like, organizing a book thing that I do for all books, and this one was sort of no exception, is I'm sure a lot of folks in the room, when they're writing something, this is common. I never know what I'm working on until I'm like 3/4 of the way done with it. And I'll print the poems out and then I'll write what the themes are, like the top 3 themes on each poem, and then put those themes individually on index cards and put them, I always have a blank wall. So there's my blank wall. And then I'll catalog those poems under those themes and see, what is this about? Is there enough here? Is this sort of thematically on point? What actually doesn't belong? Or what am I like too afraid to write about? Because those sometimes are the same question. So that's usually how I know whether or not something fits in a book. But in this case, because I was studying fiction and because I had the thought to write it like an epic, I knew there were certain gaps I needed to fill in terms of narrative. I had to be accountable to a certain kind of style, which is a nice hack. So there's something to be said about form in that way.
Yeah,
If
I,
there's
I love,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love that answer as much as I love the question.
Yeah. There's a poem that doesn't fit, it just goes maybe in a drawer for another time.
Mm. So I'm going to ask a follow-on question to that. As you got to that 3/4 mark, as you started to realize what shape this was taking and that you were writing an epic, did that change your approach to writing these poems? Did you write them more consciously at that point towards gaps that you saw, or was it still sort of the same blue sky composition?
Yeah, it was a bit more strategic, I would say. But at the same time, right before lockdown, I was lucky to take a workshop with Carl Phillips, who said this wonderfully, wonderfully comforting thing, which I've repeated so many times, which was basically anytime you're writing something within a certain period of time, it's usually thematic. So if you're writing like a poem a day for April, you're usually writing around the same themes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that was true, writing all of this uh, around the same time. There was also the container of lockdown
Mm-hmm.
and the sort of lack of usual stimuli. And then I love a purpose and a goal, so and a challenge. So I would say after identifying that's what I was doing. And that usually is also the case.
Yeah. Yeah, I love knowing that Carl said that, and being very familiar with his work. He is someone who knows what it is to write on themes and to construct books out of themes. And I love the way this book holds together. I'm intimately familiar with your earlier work. I know that you do have certain themes that return again and again. And what I love is that with Trailer Trash, it was very much out there. It was very much, heart on the page. Via Negativa took a more philosophical approach. And there's yet another shift in Moon Moon where you go speculative, where, you are inventing things to talk about things that you've spoken about elsewhere, but need to speak about in a different way. And I just love the way your mind works. I love how brilliant you are in turning these things over and over so you see them from every angle. And I know it's hard to take compliments when you're being recorded in front of a bunch of your friends and loved ones, but it's true. I am always excited when I know there's a new July Westhale book on the horizon. And, whenever I get to read your poems, it's a beautiful day.
Thank you. And thank you for doing this with me. This was such a nice way to start this tour off with a friend and fellow poet. Thank you for making this such a lovely, bright spot.
I'm very glad to be able to sit here and say nice things about something I truly enjoyed to someone I truly adore. So